Lead balloons.
Lead balloons.
The alchemy of unpopular opinions.
Unpopular opinions.
Yeah, I feel a little spicy today, so all bets are off.
And I know that you're out to get the ladies.
We are not encouraged to think critically.
Life is hard. It's supposed to be hard.
Oh my gosh. That's hilarious. Busted.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hello, Joel. How are you doing tonight?
Hola.
I guess I could also just say this morning or this afternoon, keep people guessing as to when we do this. But truly, it is the evening.
It is.
Yeah. Well, welcome, everybody, to another episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Now, tonight's episode could be the most lead balloony yet. Do you agree with that, Joel?
Absolutely. I'm feeling a little bit of trepidation, but coming out of the gates, just gonna own it.
Yeah, it's quite. It's going to be controversial tonight, but it's going to probably be one of the more lead balloony. Now, so it's going to be Joel and I tonight, and Joel, who is part Nordic and part Japanese,
is
going to be
Japanese. Yeah.
That's true. And myself, part Germanic-ish and part African American. We're going to be leading you in this conversation tonight. Now, in mentioning that I'm African American, I could be ruffling some feathers, and just to say why, I'm actually doing that deliberately. Now, I don't identify myself. When I fill out forms, when I talk to people, I don't identify as African American. Now, why would I say that? Well, my dad was born in South Africa, and he grew up there until he was like 18 or 19. Then he came over to the United States for college, and later he gained his citizenship. And so my dad is, grew up in South Africa, so I have that African heritage. Now, again, I don't identify as African American, but I think it's important to show what I'm trying to do in mentioning that is just simply to problematize the words that we use to describe things and to describe ourselves and describe situations. Tonight, we're going to be referring back to the concept of words and why it's important to use them precisely and to use them carefully and to use them persuasively. So I'm not saying I'm African American in the sense that most people understand, but it is not necessarily a straightforward word. There might be people whose lineage comes mostly from Ghana or Ivory Coast or from Ethiopia or from Botswana. Those people we would all refer to as African American, but that really doesn't do justice to their experiences, to their culture, to their ethnicity. So it's a word that does something that we kind of understand, but it's also a word that doesn't do a lot of work. It leaves a lot to be desired. Do you have any comments on that, Joel? Am I way off? Correct me if I am, please.
I mean, it's technically true, right? It could be Egyptian or Moroccan, right? All these are from the continent of Africa. And so I think also you're kind of teasing out definition and connotation. Both are can be completely different things. And you use the word problematize as we could title this podcast, we're trying to problematize the word problematic.
Yes. Yes. So anyway, just trying to ruffle some feathers. I'm not trying to make a huge point, but just simply to say again, the words that we just use so casually aren't as straightforward sometimes as we think they are. They're not as precise as maybe they could be. Maybe there will be an evolution as we move forward in terms of the way that we use African American and other designations, black, white, and so forth, that may or may not be useful, and they might evolve, they might be discarded, or who knows what will happen. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that is a somewhat circuitous segue to a concept that I want to introduce. I'm going to let Joel take the baton from me. But we want to talk kind of set the stage for our conversation by talking about a concept called Imperial Energy. That's something, Joel, that you mentioned to me in conversation a while back. And so would you take time to tell people about what is Imperial Energy, why it irks you, and how it's showing up in American culture today?
Yeah, so it took me a while to like find this phrase that just kind of hit me a while ago. I think I was listening to someone like N.T. Wright, who's a New Testament scholar, who was talking about empire as it shows up in the Bible. A lot of the Bible is criticism against the empire, and is throughout church history you see the empire come into play, and this is normally the Roman Empire, but we could go back to like Genghis Khan, we could go back to Persian Empire, Portuguese Empire, British Empire. Ultimately what I'm talking about is a way of being, a modus operandi that is has a goal in mind, and the mode of being is to suppress, repress, oppress, to convert, to force people to conform, to use violence, economic sanctions, all kinds of things to basically bring people into their empire. And the goal is power. The goal is to have, to keep, to maintain, and then to use power. That's what I call imperial energy. And that can show up in much smaller groups of people. And one of the reasons I'm so irked by this is because it took me a very long time to break free of it in terms of my own faith community growing up and understanding what I saw and now coin imperial energy from the kind of fundamentalist, evangelical Christian upbringings. A lot of imperial energy in the past, history has been blended with the church, right? Church and state. But what I saw in my churches growing up felt very similar in terms of energy. They might have not been making policies for the country, but they were using shaming tactics, guilting tactics, forcing people to conform, sending people out like to witness for the purpose of converting other people, and usually to bring them to your church so that they can be conformed to certain beliefs, be conformed to certain dress and other codes of ethics, stop smoking, stop cussing, stop drinking, stop doing all these other sorts of things. So even when I was a pastor, I found evangelism in that way very, very uncomfortable, because I just intuitively feel like this idea of trying to intrude my personal perspectives onto, push them and project them onto other people is a way to just feel power over them. And so now it's so discouraging to having broke free of that in these religious settings, which I think almost everyone who has say that that's awful. It's oppressive. It's terrible to feel. And then it even is terrible to be like inspired to act in imperial ways. I mean, I, as a teenager, said a lot of things to other people that I regret because I was told that that's what it means to be a good Christian. Now I see it at play in our culture when we're talking about a lot of social justice issues, talking about a lot of politics, and that is very discouraging when I have broken free of this and I see it showing up in these other spaces that I actually also care about.
Yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is that people have causes, and I mean, obviously not all causes are worth supporting, but many causes are. And then the question has to be, are whatever group is sort of pursuing a cause, are they going to use ethical means to do that or not? And if they're not using ethical means, are they going to be happy with the results they get in the long run? Are they going to be happy with themselves, and are they going to be happy with the kind of world that they're creating? Because these things, and just this thought came to my head, but like when it comes to, we'll get on to like free speech later on, but like when you are opposing free speech because you're afraid of that it might suffocate your cause, don't be too sure that those opponents of free speech won't eventually come for you. That opposition won't come for you. That's why it's so important. So I just thought that was an example of kind of what you're talking about, the danger of it.
Absolutely. And it is dangerous. And I would argue that it's because it comes from the ego, individual egos that then get amplified in communities. We see these in kind of mob mentality.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, it just seems like no one is living in their prefrontal cortex. They're all just acting instinctually out of this reactionary way of fear and insecurity, demonizing other people. A lot of just like shaming and moral superiority is the justification behind a lot of it. And, for me, where this really started like hitting me is an area that I care deeply about, which is my discovery, an uncovering of a blind spot that I had regarding systemic racism. And so as I was like pastoring and having more conversations with Black individuals and reading about some of the things that were kind of bubbling to the surface and at least into a broader conversation in America, I was like, I had some trepidation because one, it made total sense to me about like the logic of why racism exists and why there is such disparities in our culture after so many decades and centuries of slavery, and how that shows up even after slavery ended with the Jim Crow laws and the school to prison pipeline, prisons filled with so many African Americans. And so like the logic of that made so much sense to me, but I was hearing these voices that were really making it hard for me to get on board. Like it just felt like kind of the age old, let's fight fire with fire. Or you'll hear, liberation theologians will kind of say, oh, the oppressed need to use the tools that the oppressor uses in order to wrest power from them. And I remember even studying liberation theology in seminary and just going like, that just seems like you're just perpetuating the problem. You're just shifting the power. Who's to say that the power in these other groups' hands will be used any more ethically? And it feels like to me that sweeping dirt around to different parts of the room. And I just want to throw out there, like, my favorite voice is Brian Stevenson. If you've ever read Just Mercy, have you read that, Trent? Oh gosh, it's such a good book. And he was the man who cracked me open. He's the man who opened the door for me and led me into this field of like how systemic racism shows up in our country, how it's in our laws, his personal experiences. And then I just began to see it everywhere. And the reason why he cracked me open was because he was advocating for the right cause with the right energy. And I'm using the word right. I know that's a personal opinion. Not everyone's going to agree with me. But I would say his energy is not imperial energy. His energy is that which is clearly seeking like a transcendent healing. Like, we're not just going to churn at the bottom here and fight over the power. We're actually trying to evolve here. And I remember his book, there's at least the one I bought, a decade ago, had a quote on the front by Desmond Tutu. It said, Brian Stevenson is the Nelson Mandela of America. And I remember just kind of like rolling my eyes and like marketing, whatever. And then I read the book and I'm like, oh shit, he kind of is. And so that's what I'm trying to distinguish, is the cause is not the issue that I have issues with. It's the way that people sometimes go at trying to address the cause, or fuel the cause, or make change in the world. Yeah. It just feels to me like something I don't want to get on board with.
We've said in other discussions how we're trying to kind of amend our language, and you don't use like right or wrong or good or evil quite as much as you used to. But
yeah.
Well, what if you said that his cause was an attractive cause and an attractive method? Mm-hmm. I like the way that sounds. It's something that you find yourself drawn to, both mm-hmm. the cause and the execution of it.
It feels kind. Like the energy is attractive because it feels kind, it feels patient, and maybe the most important, it feels wise. His
Wise.
approach feels
Skillful.
wise. It doesn't feel reactionary. It doesn't feel ego driven. He's not trying to amass power for himself. It's just like I trust it instinctively.
I've had moments in my life where I've pursued what I believe to be a good cause. Sometimes just me, getting vindication or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
But me pursuing my cause, and then I have to do a debrief when it's over and realize that I was not skillful, and I simply acted impulsively and selfishly and foolishly. It wasn't skillful. It wasn't skillful at all. So, yeah. Okay, so I want to move a little bit to keep the thing going, but I want to move to the topic of freedom of speech and how speech is being curtailed, how speech is being corrupted. Joel, freedom of speech is huge. It's in the First Amendment to the Constitution. It's obviously a huge part of who we are as a country. Do you feel like we're living in a time of greater or lesser freedom of speech than, say, like 20 years ago? And is this a good or bad thing? And to give you one more question, who are or what is the word police? So feel free to answer any of those in any of the order you want to.
Yeah, I definitely think we're regressing as a society. I think social media has a huge part to play in that. I'm not trying to make social media the nexus of all of the social ills that are happening in our world. But I do think when you have a platform like that for such wide usage of communication that really connects with reactionary, it's really designed to highlight just reactionary kinds of things. It's not designed to bring slow, transformative conversation. That social media doesn't do that. And there are people who might do that, but they don't have the most followers. You know what I mean? So I would say it's regressing, and that is not an attractive thing for me. That is a discouraging shift. I feel concerned that we are, what feels like to me, that we are almost acquiescing some of the loudest microphones to some of the most immature voices. It feels like the motivation for these kind of spaces are not to bring peace and harmony. They're not to bring healing and really, to heal the wounds rather than just wound others in the same way. It feels like to me there is a real struggle in our culture because we lack elders. We don't really have, to go back to one of our conversations about medicinal masculinity and talking about the book Adam's Return, we don't really have male initiation rites in our culture anymore. What you would see in indigenous people groups, whether they were South American, African, Southeast Asian islanders, we don't have these initiation rites that help boys become men. And so what we have is a lot of boy energy in men's bodies. And so I think we don't have a lot of elders, men and women. When I hear an elder, it brings me so much hope. But those elders rarely are the ones that people are amassing to listen to. And so that is a concern to me. And the word police it's anyone who thinks that they can control someone else's language. It might be, someone in your school class who tells you what's right and wrong to say. And they just find it, sometimes they're the grammar police. You're just quit messing with my conjunctions. But where it really shows up is when it becomes almost a sermon on what's morally acceptable to say and what's morally and what's immoral. And this has become a pretty huge issue, especially as we see what's with what I learned about as Tumblr culture, with some of these words that
Say it again.
Tumblr culture.
Tumblr culture. Okay.
Where a lot of these kind of movements began, and we got words like microaggression, we got words like canceling, we got I'm trying to think of other examples, problematic, and these sorts of things, and I is where it just begins to say, like, we began to judge the intentions of people's hearts and the intentions behind their words, and we just like beat them over the head with a verbal bat. And to me, that is like, I want to problematize problematic. Like, there is a energy there that is clearly not about bringing any kind of like reconciliation, restitution, restoration, but about like just being right I have to be right. The only way for me to be right is to make you wrong. And I would argue that is a foolish way of like owning your voice. Like, it's folly to think you can be right by making other people wrong. It's just not wise.
And one of the problems that I have in this sort of new speech environment is it's weird, Joel, because people are both being judged by what they say, I think, and a lot of times wrongly, not given maybe enough grace. They're also being judged by what we think they might be thinking, right? Mm-hmm. So we'll say, oh, he said that, that's wrong. But then we'll also say, oh, he said that, but he can't really mean that, right? So somebody says, I am not a racist. They're a racist. Clearly they are. Well, they've said that they're not. Now, your job now, if you're going to accuse somebody, just like in our justice system, if you're going to accuse somebody of being a racist, you better have something that we all like to call evidence. Yeah. Because the result in our society of being dubbed a racist is a huge one, and rightly so. If you are truly somebody who feels and believes and says things to show that you are superior to other types of people, you're corrosive to our society, and you should be shamed, rightly, publicly. But until somebody has done something that is clearly that rises to the level that I feel people should be very concerned about just casually labeling somebody a racist.
Fear works,
and I'm
Trent.
afraid. What?
Fear works. That's the problem.
Yeah, and this is very, very much a danger. So I was, in preparation for this, one of the words that has become more popular, as you mentioned, is microaggression. And so I was looking that up online, and I saw a website. The city of Cambridge, Massachusetts has like a list. I'm sure many other cities do. It looks like it's entering sort of the HR training manual, but a list of like 15 or so examples of microaggressions. Now, I believe that there can be situations where people can be behaving in certain ways towards members of another ethnicity or nationality or whatever, or religious group, and they or gender, and they can be doing something and it's unkind, and they're not aware of it, and maybe they need to be made aware of it. But the far extreme, in my opinion, that I saw on this list is it's all of these behaviors that could be done so innocently, and actually innocently, that the people who are the so-called perpetrator of these are now have to be hyper aware of every little thing that they do. And it's also making members of ethnicities toward whom these microaggressions might be directed also hyper aware of things that they may never have been thinking about. So that, like, for example, one of those was if a microaggression that you should be aware of is if you go up to an Asian person and ask them for help with math or science. Now, what if an Asian person It's not on their radar screen at all. And one of their friends or coworkers comes up and, hey, can you help me with this formula, this sort of thing? Suddenly they're like, oh, maybe this person who asked me this question doesn't really have honest intentions. They want to make a statement about my race. And the person doing it is like, hey, I just need help. I didn't even pay attention. I'm not even thinking about what your race is, because I don't care, because I like you as a person. And by the way, you're really helpful and really smart. You just happen to be, and I could use your help. They're creating a world. These whoever they are, these word police are creating a world where we can't be authentically ourselves and expect that other people are going to have the fucking balls to come say, hey, don't say that to me. It's offensive. Please, would you not do that? No, we now all have to be walking on eggshells, because if I commit a microaggression, I might just be dooming somebody to a life of trauma. Yeah. This is not a sustainable way of generating the kinds of changes that are going to make our society better. They're just making everybody fucking afraid of each other, and nobody really aware of how they can actually love. I'll just shut up. Let me just give one more quick example. No, I won't. We got to move forward. But anyway, do you have any response to that, Joel?
I mean, two things. One is just a quote, and the other is a story. The quote comes from Richard Rohr, again, one of my favorite authors. And he says, only the ego can be offended. And when I use the word ego, I don't mean that as, an absolute pejorative. I mean that everyone has an ego. I have an ego. Egos serve us. They're very, very important. But they are designed psychologically to be right about themselves. Like my ego, its very heart is to be right about itself. And all fear and all insecurity come from the ego. This is kind of my way of seeing ego. And this is where Jesus says, if you want to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. I think he's talking about what it means to detach from our ego. Not that we can kill it or lose it. We can't. We can detach from it and have a different relationship with it. Or what Paul calls sarx, flesh, the difference between spirit and flesh. I think he would be the difference between our ego and our true self. And learning to not be driven by these very instinctual energies of fear and insecurity. So that's when I hear people offended. That's I immediately, I'm sorry, I'm just going, there's the ego at play. And when I know someone is not having ego at play, there are two traits. They are humble and they don't take themselves too seriously. And those are not two traits that I see happening heavily in the kind of social justice world. These beautiful causes that I believe so heavily in are not full of people who are humble and don't take themselves too seriously. Those are the people I think would revolutionize this world. But anyway, here's a quick story. I was talking with my partner Poonam, and she said I could share this. She was back in Dallas, like 2016. There was a shooting, and it was actually so a shooter shot several police here in Dallas, and it kind of sparked a lot of this kind of the race relations in Dallas are very, very tense all the time anyways, and then distrust in police. But police were being shot, and so it rose up this whole side on a lot of the white communities going like, we're for the police kind of thing. And it created some very good, what I found to be good conversations amongst the black and white churches. People were doing pulpit swaps, and it was really great. Poonam, who's not a Christian, went to this local small church that had like a coffee shop, and they had like a panel discussion about it. And she just said that one of the speakers on the panel was an African-American woman, and she was expressing a ton of anger, just a lot of anger. And, I have a lot of empathy for that. I mean, I can't imagine what it is like to live in a country that systemically through laws and culture has been literally oppressing and trying to really just keep a people in poverty and without power. Like, to see that show up while everyone's talking about, DEI, I mean, it's got to be like really, really infuriating. So I can empathize and get there. But in that panel, she said there was this boy who was sitting on the front, a white guy, I say boy, he was a young man. And Poonam said he was just sitting on the front, just innocently, just soaking in everything. And at one point, he just asked a question, you know, when it's Q&A. It was an innocent question, and she shut him down.
Wow.
And just with anger, just basically shut the fuck up kind of energy. And Poonam was sitting in the back, and she's an ally and advocate for a lot of these things, and does a lot of work in the city civically. But she was just like, oh my gosh, what did you just do to that poor kid? And to me, I've seen this happen. I've moderated panels where I've seen that anger show up in like a performative way to just kind of like literally just make a point. And it's not fruitful. I've not seen it be fruitful. That poor kid he was open. He was on the precipice of really trying to understand. And instead, that person, because they weren't wise, they didn't have control, they hadn't fully processed their emotions yet, they didn't come to a place where they could speak with a way that brings transformation, actually made the problem worse, made the problem further away, or made the solution further away. And so my recommendation to people like this is that your anger is legitimate. Like, I will not take any issue with your anger. But until you can really process that, come to a space where you can like see that wound, but it's not like causing you to get triggered constantly, please step off of the stage and give the mic to someone who has a wiser voice. That would be my challenge, because those people, they are really genuinely seeking to understand. Some of these things are very hard to swallow. These pills are hard to swallow. And to have someone just like angrily trying to shove it down people's throats, it's just like that. It doesn't work in religion, and it won't work in social justice. Okay? That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. Yeah, because you and I, we are both resistant to any form of fundamentalism.
I hate it.
Fundamentalism is not just about sort of a strong, unwavering religious conviction, but it's basically this sense that you're right and you're going to be dogmatic about it, and you're not open to critique. You're not in the process of critiquing your own beliefs. You have these sort of undeniable, irrefutable convictions that you won't entertain conversation about. And you had, I'm just looking here in my notes, you had prompted me about this story from the movie Revenge of the Sith.
Oh, yeah.
Where towards the end of the movie, Obi-Wan Kenobi goes to face off against Anakin, who's just basically
turned to the dark side,
gone off the reservation. You know, he's just gone rogue completely, and he's kind of turned into just a someone filled with anger and the sense that their way and their way alone is right, and so they're having this confrontation and fires exploding everywhere. And Padme, he's just like almost killed Padme, and he says, Anakin says, if you're not for me, or if you're not with me, you're against me. Isn't that what he says? If you're not with me, you're against me. And then Obi-Wan says, only a Sith deals in absolutes. I will do what I must. And then they go have their fight. But I like that you mentioned that, because this sense that if you're not with me, you're against me. If you're not for our cause, you're against our cause. And it's like, wait a minute. That's not how things work. Not everybody is going to be 100% for your cause or 100% against your cause. And this irritates the crap out of me, because
me too, man.
In our day and age today, you've got to be on a team, and you've got to check all the boxes and be 100% for that team. And if you complicate an issue or bring nuance, then you're just causing problems because we need you to be for us or against us. So it's like, wait a minute, that's not how life works. We all have some things that we agree with, some things that we disagree on, and we need to have really important discussions. And obviously, having discussions is not going to solve every problem in the world, but not having them is certainly not going to. We've got to try to understand what is it that you're saying. Is it true or not? And where might you, who I'm talking to, be missing something, and I can help you to see that. But this whole team business, it's so adolescent. It's so it's so
tribes.
Ugly.
It's old
tribes.
School tribes, and maybe we'll do another podcast when we talk about labels. I also hate labels.
Yes.
And like
liberal, conservative.
It's just like, stop it. It's what I grew up in. We're Pentecostal. We're different than the Baptists. We're different from the Methodists. Yeah. And then you talk about the non-Christians in the world. It's just like we're defined by what we're against, right?
Yes.
And it's such an adolescent way of viewing the world. And I use that word. No, everyone goes through adolescence. We all have had developing brains, and our brains at some point in our life really only could deal with dichotomies, right? Our brains could only really think of things in black and white. But as we grow and as our brains mature, hopefully life teaches us that the world doesn't exist like that. I used to have a slide that I would show when I was preaching sermons, and there would be like a block at the top, and it was like half black, half white, and it would be like, right, wrong, yes, no, whatever. And then that's just like how our brain wants to think. But then down here, real life, and it just had a gradient, and it just says, it depends. And that's really, what we're talking about is wisdom doesn't know the answer before the question's asked. Wisdom is curious. Wisdom, and I think about this, some of my Black friends who have different views than me, and I find myself, there are very few of my Black friends that I can have this conversation with without them painting me already as like, okay, you clearly don't get it and you have some growing to do. And I'm just like, okay, maybe be curious about what I'm seeing, what I believe, because I think that a lot of these people, I probably have very similar views to them in terms of the ills of our society and the wrongs that need to be righted, the damage that we can repair. I probably have a lot of similar views, but where we differ sometimes is how do we address that? What is an effective way? What's more important, being right or getting to a right outcome?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that is a hard transition for our ego to make. It does not want us to move to the right outcome. It wants us to stay in the space of being right. And so that's kind of how I'm thinking about some of these conversations when I think of Anakin, if you're not for me, you're against me. That is I'm 44 and I still have that voice pop up inside of me when my insecurity and my fear get activated. I'm thinking, oh, here's someone that's bad. I can feel it. It's such an old shit deep down in my stomach. It's just oh, this person's bad. But then I have to stop and go no, Joel, you've done the work. You've done the inner work. Remember, they're not bad. Yeah. These are your fears speaking. These are your anger and your old pain that you're still trying to process. This is your trauma that you're still trying to process. You think, I was sexually abused as a kid, and it's easy for me to think other people are going to take advantage of me. My brain goes back to that and tries to play out something that happened to me, and I project it onto other people. But 99% of the time, it is not true. It is not true. And so if I allow that to keep being true, I won't grow and evolve and find out that so many of the people that are around me, we're actually all swimming in the same direction. We just don't trust each other yet.
I think a practice that I've tried to do over the past few years, I probably need to be doing it more than I am right now. But anytime I'm out driving or I'm out in public or I'm watching something on TV or YouTube or whatever, and I see a person sort of expressing themselves in a way that I might deem as childish or offensive or irritating, whatever. One of the things I do is I back up for just a second and I ask myself, or I say, hey, I hope that they're in the process of becoming an authentic person right now, and that they're trying to be authentic, because I would much rather that they're trying to express themselves authentically than that they're bottling it up and hurting themselves, and ultimately it just explodes in a way that none of us really wants to contend with in a real act of violence. I would rather see somebody exercising their right of expression, their right of free speech, and there's this concept of pluralism, and pluralism is an environment in which we live together with people who are different, who think differently, who say things differently than we do, and act differently. Now, we don't have the luxury, and maybe not even it's desirable, it's not desirable to live in a world where it's just us. We would be totally alone if that was the goals, having everybody completely agree with everything that we think. So we live in a world, we rub shoulders constantly with people who are very different. And I think that can be a very good thing. But it does require, as you've said, wisdom. It requires a skill set, and it requires courage. It requires patience, because it's painful. It's painful to live with people who say things that you disagree with, whether their argument is good or not, and to say things that are offensive. But I think it's worth doing business with people who are not easy for us to deal with, because we're also not easy to deal with, and we depend upon the long suffering of other people towards us, and we should cultivate that same ethic toward other people. And I'm afraid that our culture is not really engaged in that struggle right now. It doesn't feel like.
Yeah, I hear that. I love the pluralism. I love diversity, because without diversity, I don't know that I would have been able to really break free into what I really want to believe about the world, which is that, like, personally, I don't believe in race. That's going to make some people go, "If you do," but like, also the same people are arguing that race is a social construct. It is, like, we as a society create these labels.
Yes.
And go back to the very beginning with African American. These words they're very kind of amorphous, and we use them in ways that are usually about like self-identifying, which is great. But like, I truly believe the spiritual path is breaking free of all of our labels. Like, I've been on a path to break free of the label of pastor, which was my vocation that I studied for, and that was scary. I've tried to break free of these other labels, like male, like these kinds of even words that I think are so core to my DNA. Just like, what if my essence, my spirit, is like both feminine and masculine? Going back to another one of our conversations. So it's inner work that I think diversity helps me dive in and go like, okay, who am I? And like, how can I break free from this container that I call Joel, so that I can find this gigantic energy, this field that I believe Joel is. And this energy in this field isn't just Joel, it's also Trent. It's also so-and-so. Like, look, we begin to like meet each other. Like, I read someone like Rumi, who would a wonderful poet, or like Maya Angelou, and just like these people that speak of like this connection, this deep transcendent connection between all people. And they both come at it from different kind of perspectives and different soils. They grew up on different continents and totally different environments. But like, I find the mystics and the poets really help us see that like all these stories about how disconnected we are, they're lies. They're not true.
Yeah.
And so once people kind of get to that space, that's where I feel like traction happens with activism and social justice, because it's no longer about trying to shift the power dynamics. It's about helping everyone become enlightened. And that's the antidote to racism. The antidote to racism is awakening and enlightenment. It isn't like swishing down conformity, guilt, and shame. That is actually going to make it worse. That's why I think January 6th insurrection happened. You had a group of people who didn't feel heard, and they did some really atrocious things. Yeah. And that's going to keep happening until we can until some leaders can sit down and kind of go like, hey, tell us about your situation. I know it sucks. I get it. I'm not asking Black people to do that because they've had to listen so often. Empower some white people to do that, because I was talking with the Puna, missionaries. What did they used to do when they would go over and try and convert everyone? What was the most effective thing to do? Is to get an insider to do their messaging for them. So maybe we empower some people on the inside to really have the patient conversations that help people awaken, rather than just hitting each other with baseball bats. Because guess what?
Yeah,
they'll pick up a bat and hit back, and we're just exacerbating the problem.
And we obviously, I think there's value in having conversations about huge value. It's conversations about what our history was as a country, what it is, and systemic racism, and how people are really being held back. They're extremely important, but to the end of creating deeper connections with people, where all of these particularities that once kept us apart are sort of not denied, but we're not as aware of them. We just become connected in these ecstatic moments with each other. I remember almost 20 years ago when I was in seminary, one of the guys who lived in my dorm, I was having dinner with him. We were cooking together, and this gentleman had a different skin color than mine. And I was asking him what was your experience as a person of a different skin color in this environment? And it was interesting because I think he saw the bullshit and the lack of authenticity. He saw right through it. And he's just like, well, the first thing I want you to know is that my name, and I'm now forgetting his name, and I probably shouldn't share it anyway. I'll just say it's Steve. But he's like, the first thing I want you to know, Trent, is that my name is Steve. And it was such a powerful moment. I don't think it immediately registered with me, but I thought about it I've thought about it since then, and realized that he was basically saying, more than anything, Trent, I want to connect with you as another human being. All these other things they're peripheral stuff at the end of the day. I mean, they're peripheral to the fact that ultimately I want to connect with you as another member of the human species. I want to connect with you. And when we're having those really powerful connections, whether it's uproarious laughter, or whether we're crying together, or whether we're singing together, or watching a movie, or doing great work together, if people are honest, we sort of forget about those skin shades and shapes and all these kinds of things that have in the past meant that we should think differently of each other. When we're having those deep connections, a lot of those things aren't forgotten, but they're not as central. We're in that really sense of sort of being merged with these other people in such a powerful way. So that's, I think, what we're getting at.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
All right, Joel. So we're going to close it out here, but I want to give you the final word. What are some concrete steps that people can take to move the needle? What is a concrete step that people can take to move the needle toward a better world without becoming an asshole in the process? How can these devilish advocates start performing good ways of doing good rather than bad ways?
Yeah. I've been in several workshops and things. I'm just speaking about one issue right now because we can't talk about all the issues. And so hopefully everyone understands I'm not trying to harp on race. I'm just trying to use this as an example that speaks, hopefully, transcends to all kinds of things that people care about. But I've been in a lot of workshops and read a lot of books and had a lot of intentional conversations around systemic racism. And so I would, some of the best things I've heard from the wise elders that I've, that have been working since the civil rights movement and with Martin Luther King Jr. and all of these really beautiful movements of nonviolence, say like patience, like first like step and go like these kinds of deep-seated issues can't change quickly. They can't. And so like patience is important. Anything that changes quickly is actually not a real change. I think you should distrust that transformed in any way, shape, or form, and will probably snap back to the same or even worse state quickly. So like the deep-seated change is more like agriculture. And you got to, you can't control the weather, but it's going to have a big effect on the crop. And so there's a lot of things that I've heard that I think are really, really good. And I would advocate for people to focus on systemic issues like policy, cultural things that hit a lot of people instead of like trying to go after individuals. If that's what you really care about, then that would be, I think, a positive step. Second is just love your neighbor kind of stuff. How we treat people, I strongly believe how we treat people is the kind of vision we are going to manifest. And when I hear some podcasts or people talking or panelists or whatever, it feels like the kind of vision that they are envisioning is a world of division and just browbeating and just judgmentalism, a world where there's no connection, a world that you were kind of talking about, like everyone's just scared of each other. You only want to trust people who are like most like you. And I'm not interested in that vision. I don't want to live in that world. So that's why I say these things, because I know they're unpopular, but I want to like help people maybe reconsider the vision that they are manifesting with the behaviors that they are doing.
Shabam, ladies and gentlemen, that's Joel Triska at his finest.
Okay.
He's a wordsmith. All right. Well, thanks everybody for being part of this conversation, this iteration of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. We wish you well, and we're going to call it good.
Peace, guys.